I had this realization today, and I came to this realization because I think that like one of the things that I tend to do is reflect. I ask myself questions sometimes, like why do I react this way to this sort of thing? And so today the question that came to mind was sort of like why is it when it comes to bad logic that your reaction to bad logic has not been a sort of an ordinary response, which is to just observe, that it's bad logic, but instead to have a sort of rage in your heart and a sort of malice towards bad logic. What is it that makes you what is it about bad logic that has a way of infuriating you the way that it does? And, why is it that you had this special form of hatred in your heart, and particularly towards the fallacy of relative privation? As like one of the biggest fallacies on the internet that I hate. And if you don't know what that is, I will include a link in the underbarb, and I will also do my best to articulate what the fallacy of relative privation is. Every time you hear, and hold on, let me fix something. Every time you hear somebody on YouTube basically complain about first world problems, just know that what they are using is a form of bad logic known as the fallacy of relative privation. And conceptually, what it is that person A brings up problem A, right? As a variable, and that A could be anything, anything at all. I'm just telling you the form it takes place in. So then person B comes along and brings up problem B and says, "Well, you can't complain about problem A because problem A is not all that significant compared to problem B. So you need to shut up about that, and we all need to start focusing on problem B instead, or you need to prove to me that you care about problem B before I will actually listen to you about your critique of problem A." And this is bad logic, and to give you an example, for instance, the Dear Muslima letter from Richard Richard Dawkins, who, by the way, this channel does not like criticizing. It's not something that I like being aware of. The fact that this guy is a bit of a dick. It's like somebody that you formerly admired, and coming to a realization that they're not really all that great of a person. With Richard Dawkins and Richard Dawkins' part. But the Dear Muslima letter is like one of the best examples of the fallacy of relative privation, in particular because it's so prevalent here on YouTube. In that, as an example, when Rebecca Watson mentioned the fact that you probably shouldn't corner women on elevators in order to ask them on dates, particularly when that date is so closely tied to sexuality. If you're asking somebody back to your hotel room, usually, for the most part, what you have in mind is sex. So in that situation, and Rebecca Watson's politely declining the guy. I didn't have a problem with what Rebecca Watson said because, from my perspective, it was just education. It was just be more aware of your surroundings on her part, and that was totally cool. But a bunch of people reacted to this like, how dare she complain about this situation in the first place? And for me, it was more of, if you don't want to creep women out, don't engage in this behavior. That was red red and obvious to me when I watched that video. But you know Rebecca Watson, was pilloried all over YouTube for making this, and all she did was say something that most people didn't have a lot of sympathy for because they felt that it was a first world problem. And my reaction to this is that it's true that in Saudi Arabia women can't drive, but on top of that, you have female genital mutilation elsewhere. Does that mean that the problem that Saudi Arabian women have where they can't drive is not valid, just because of the fact that somewhere else in the world an even worse problem exists. I don't think that I mean, the problem here is that the conclusion doesn't follow from the premise. The premise is only being brought up, and it's being brought up as a red herring. And in particular, here on YouTube, it's brought up as a red herring in bad faith, where the person bringing up this red herring, is fully aware of what they're doing. I mean, on some level, they have to be conscious of the fact that they are deliberately trying to deflect from actually having to do the emotional work of empathizing with a woman or another person when they talk about or describe their problem. I mean, it's being used purely in bad faith to derail a discussion and for no other purpose, no other higher, purpose that could justify or rationalize or make its use, excusable in any regard. I mean, it's being used purely in bad faith by intentional saboteurs from the way that I see it. And when I thought about it, I thought about, like, why is it that me personally was able to level with Rebecca Watson and was able to see through the rubric even before I had, an awareness of what this argument and the problems with this argument and the fact that it was considered by logicians to be, a fallacious argument in the first place. I think the reason that I had such, like, a very visceral and enraged reaction to it was just, number one, growing up as I did in the United States and in the context of American politics, I see politicians in Washington thrive off using logical fallacies all the time. And I think that is very concerning and enraging. The fact that politics often produces politicians that don't actually use strong logic in a lot of cases, and yet people seem to believe that they are using strong arguments when in fact their arguments are, very, very weak. you know. But on top of that, it was. I have a personal story. I have a father, or I had a father, and my dad was, well, he provided, but by the same breath, he was very emotionally abusive to me and my mother for a long time, and when he used to drink way back in the day, he quit. Fortunately, God, especially because he saw what it was doing to him. But there were days when Mom left and went off, into a battered women's shelter for a while, and then came back, because of the fact that Dad had been drinking and he had hit her at one point. He had just sort of completely, come unglued because of the fact that he was drinking, but he was always like angry. It was just that you give him alcohol and he gets pissed off and he flies into a blinding white hot rage, compared to his just elevated level on a regular basis. It was evident that my father was quite unhappy, especially in his final days, and he took a lot of his misery out on me and Mom for a number of years. So I had this friend who I don't think I ever spoke to again after she said this to me, but it was introduced to me in the form of, you complain a lot about your dad, but at least you have a father. And that right there made all the bad logic, all the crap that's hurled at me with the fallacy of relative privation, all the more enraging than it would have been if it hadn't been for that person's that person's comment. I don't think that my reaction, and particularly to the fallacy of relative privation, would have been as brutally strong as it actually was. I mean, my life has been colored, in a way as a sort of very strong reaction to other people and the bullshit that they've put me through. And that was one of them. I mean, this was somebody that I considered a friend, and then after that point, it just tore everything out that I would have considered support. At that point, it was just I can't deal with you anymore, and now I know that whoever this individual was, I've forgotten the face, I've forgotten the name of who did it, but whoever they were, I know now that their logic was bad. That the fact that some kids, come from divorced families, some kids don't have a dad, in no way makes the fact that my father was emotionally abusive any less significant or any less, valid as a problem. And now I see the same types of arguments, the same form of argumentation being used against feminists here on YouTube.